Mr. President, on another matter, I spoke last week about the importance of establishing a lasting peace in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where Russia, without any chance of contradiction, is the aggressor. But I appreciate President Trump on his efforts as a peacemaker. And I congratulate the administration, particularly Secretary Rubio and the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, at working to negotiate a 30-day ceasefire. At least that's what Ukraine has agreed to. But now the ball is in Vladimir Putin's court. As I said last week, this is a big deal. Hundreds of thousands of casualties on each side have arisen as a result of this 3-year war in Ukraine. But it's important that these negotiations get it right. It's true that a lasting peace would be no small achievement. But one of the most important aspects to getting this right is to make sure that it does not result in nuclear proliferation. That is, more countries than currently have nuclear weapons getting those nuclear weapons because they feel insecure and they feel it's critical to their ability to continue to exist. As I mentioned last week, the United States, along with Russia and the United Kingdom back in 1994, signed something called the Budapest Memorandum. In this agreement, these 3 countries gave Ukraine security guarantees, guaranteeing its independence and territorial integrity in exchange for Ukraine turning over its nuclear weapons arsenal. Ukraine, of course, had been part of the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union fell, it had the world's 3rd largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. And so this was a landmark agreement where Ukraine agreed, now an independent republic, agreed to turn over its nuclear weapons rather than to retain them. Such agreements are important because in the absence of non-proliferation agreements, other countries may be tempted to seek and acquire nuclear weapons to provide for their own security and their own protection. This is another reason why it's so important to achieve a lasting peace in the ongoing war by Russia against Ukraine, now going on 3 years. Nuclear proliferation is different. It is a unique threat, and it is a threat to America's core interests and to peace in the world. It's much harder to create a safer, more peaceful world if the number of countries seeking nuclear weapons is growing. I know President Trump concurs, and he's described nuclear weapons as an existential threat, which they are. I know that sounds dire, and perhaps we'd like not to think about such terrible things, but we must, because it is reality. In the wake of weak or non-existent security assurances in a more dangerous world, thanks to Russia, China, and Iran, additional countries are starting to think about acquiring nuclear programs. This is happening in Poland, where Prime Minister Donald Tusk suggested that Poland might, quote, reach for opportunities related to nuclear weapons, close quote. Poland, of course, is a signatory to the 1970 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which prohibited all but 5 declared nuclear powers at the time from acquiring nuclear weapons. In a similar vein, Germany, through the newly elected chancellor, has discussed the possibility that France and Britain might share their nuclear arsenal with Ukraine. Now, these are warning signs. These are flashing red signs that no one should take lightly. While we, of course, welcome European countries, primarily members of NATO, to increase their defense spending for conventional purposes, nuclear proliferation is not the way to a more stable and peaceful world. If we look back to 1956, the United States had to step in to prevent the Suez Crisis from escalating into a nuclear conflict between the Soviet Union, Britain, and France. In 1973, a nuclear alert during the Arab-Israeli War. United States nuclear forces were put on alert in response to what turned out to be, thankfully, a false alert. But again, in 1999, the United States stepped in to stop nuclear escalation during the Kargil war between India and Pakistan. So it is imperative that while the United States facilitates a lasting and enforceable peace between Russia and Ukraine, that at the same time we need to reduce the likelihood of nuclear proliferation. Suffice it to say, the stakes could not be higher. We're living in one of the most dangerous times since World War II. President Trump and Vice President Vance are correct in taking all reasonable and necessary efforts to end the war in Ukraine, but it requires a stable and lasting and enforceable peace to prevent this proliferation of nuclear weapons. I applaud President Trump for his efforts to bring about this peace. If President Trump can successfully pull this off, it will be an accomplishment for which humanity will owe him a profound debt of gratitude.